I never thought a little snow on my truck would destroy my life. But here we are, standing in front of Judge Morrison while a HOA president with a blonde bob cut glares at me like I murdered her cat. My name is Thompson, and I live in Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community in Denver, Colorado. I bought my house here 3 years ago, thinking it would be a quiet place to settle down after my divorce. The neighborhood looked perfect. Neat lawns, matching mailboxes, a clubhouse with a pool, and strict rules that I figured would keep property values high. What I didn't know was that those strict rules would become the bane of my entire existence. It started on a Tuesday morning in January. I woke up to find my black Ford F-150 covered in about 6 inches of fresh powder from the overnight snowfall. I was already running late for work at the construction site, so I did what any normal person would do. I cleared off my windshields, mirrors, and lights, made sure I could see properly, and headed out. The truck bed still had snow in it, but that wasn't going anywhere. It was just sitting there, frozen solid. I got home that evening around 6, exhausted from a long day of supervising a commercial renovation project downtown. My mailbox had the usual junk mail, a couple of bills, and a bright orange envelope that immediately made my stomach drop. Orange envelopes in Meadowbrook Heights meant only one thing. The HOA had an issue with you. I tore it open right there on my driveway. The letter was printed on official Meadowbrook Heights HOA letterhead, complete with a little logo of a house surrounded by flowers that now seemed mocking. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has come to our attention that your vehicle, a black Ford F-150 with license plate Colorado DXR 4829, was observed leaving the premises on January 14th with excessive snow accumulation in the truck bed and on the roof. Per HOA Covenant Section 12.4 B, all vehicles must be maintained in a clean and presentable condition, and snow accumulation is considered a safety hazard and aesthetic violation. You are hereby fined $150. Payment is due within 15 days. Failure to comply will result in additional fines and possible legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Morrison, HOA President. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. $150 for snow in my truck bed. I had cleared everything that mattered for safety. The snow in the bed wasn't going to fly off and hit anyone. It was in a truck bed, literally designed to hold stuff. I went inside, poured myself a beer, and tried to calm down. My golden retriever, Max, sensed my frustration and put his head on my lap. I pulled out my HOA covenant booklet, a thick document I had signed when I bought the house, but never actually read in detail. I found Section 12.4 B buried on page 47. All vehicles parked in driveways, garages, or streets within Meadowbrook Heights must be maintained in clean, presentable condition. This includes, but is not limited to, washing regularly, removing debris, clearing snow and ice from all surfaces, and ensuring no leaking fluids. Violations will result in fines starting at $150. The wording was vague enough that Patricia could interpret it however she wanted. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Dave Henderson, who had lived in the community for 8 years. Dave, did you get a fine for snow on your truck? I asked. What? No, why would I? He sounded genuinely confused. I got hit with $150 for having snow in my truck bed this morning. Dave laughed. You're kidding. That's insane. I've driven out of here plenty of times with snow on my truck. Half the neighborhood has SUVs covered in snow during winter. Apparently, Patricia thinks it's a violation. Oh man, Patricia. Dave's voice dropped. She's been on a power trip lately. Last month, she fined the Johnsons for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. They were out of town and forgot to have someone bring them in. This is ridiculous. I'm going to fight this. Good luck. The HOA board backs her on everything. They meet Thursday nights at the Clubhouse if you want to appeal. I marked my calendar. Thursday was 2 days away. I spent the next evening gathering evidence. Photos of other vehicles in the neighborhood with snow on them. Documentation showing I had cleared all safety-critical areas of my truck. And research on Colorado vehicle laws that confirmed I had met all legal requirements for snow removal. Thursday evening, I walked into the Meadowbrook Heights Clubhouse at 7 o'clock sharp. The main room had been set up with a long table at the front where Patricia Morrison sat flanked by 4 other board members. About 15 residents sat in folding chairs facing them. Patricia was exactly what you would picture. Mid-50s, blonde bob haircut with too much hairspray, a burgundy blazer that looked expensive, and a permanent expression like she had just smelled something unpleasant. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia said, tapping a gavel on the table. "Let us begin the January HOA board meeting. First order of business, approval of last month's minutes." I sat through 20 minutes of mind-numbing discussion about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Finally, Patricia looked at a clipboard and said, "We now open the floor for resident concerns. Please keep comments brief." I stood up. "Hi, I'm Aaron Thompson, 4782 Maple Drive. I'm here to appeal a fine I received for allegedly having excessive snow on my vehicle." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Thompson, yes. I personally observed your vehicle on the morning of January 14th leaving the neighborhood with significant snow accumulation. The fine stands. With all due respect, I cleared all safety-required areas. The snow was in the truck bed, which is designed to carry materials. Colorado law doesn't require snow removal from truck beds. Colorado law is irrelevant. HOA covenants supersede state law regarding community standards," Patricia said, her voice clipped. "Actually, they don't," I replied, keeping my tone even. HOA covenants cannot violate state or federal law, but that aside, the covenant says vehicles must be maintained in clean, presentable condition. Snow in a truck bed after a snowstorm is completely normal and doesn't violate any reasonable interpretation of that rule. A man next to Patricia, who wore thick glasses and had a name tag reading Gerald Foster, Treasurer, cleared his throat. "The board has interpreted that section to include snow removal. The fine is appropriate. Then why haven't other residents been fined? I have photos here of at least 6 vehicles that had snow on them the same day." I held up my phone. Patricia's face reddened. "Those violations were not reported. When violations come to our attention, we address them. Your fine stands. If you wish to continue this discussion, you may submit a formal written appeal which will be reviewed at next month's meeting." "I want to appeal now. I'm here in person." "The procedure requires written appeals." "Good evening, Mr. Thompson." Patricia looked past me. "Next resident concern?" I stood there for a moment, fury building in my chest. The whole system was rigged. Patricia had unilateral power to fine people based on her personal judgments, and the board backed her automatically. I walked out of the clubhouse, got in my truck, and sat there gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't going to pay the fine. I decided right then that if Patricia wanted to play hardball, I would play too. The next morning, I drafted a detailed written appeal citing the HOA covenant sections, Colorado law, and pointing out the selective enforcement. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, which was actually just a small room inside the clubhouse. A bored-looking woman at the desk stamped it received and told me I would hear back in 30 days. A week later, I got another orange envelope. This one informed me that my appeal had been reviewed and denied, and I now owed an additional $50 late fee because I hadn't paid the original fine within 15 days. The total was now $200. I called a lawyer friend, Marcus, who practiced property law in Denver. "Aaron, here's the deal," Marcus said over lunch at a diner near my job site. "HOAs have broad authority under Colorado law. They can set community standards through covenants, and homeowners agree to those standards when they buy property. You signed that covenant. But this is absurd. It's snow in Colorado in January. I agree it's absurd, but unless you can prove the fine violates state law or that the HOA is selectively enforcing rules in a discriminatory way, you're probably stuck with it. Fighting it would cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. So they can just make up whatever they want, pretty much, as long as it's in the covenant language and applied consistently. The problem is proving inconsistent application. You need to show a pattern." I left that lunch feeling defeated but not broken. I started documenting everything. Every time I drove through the neighborhood, I took photos of any covenant violations I could spot. Trucks with snow, cars parked slightly over driveway edges, holiday decorations left up past the allowed date, trash cans visible from the street. I created a spreadsheet tracking violations and whether they received fines. Over the next month, I identified 42 clear violations of various HOA rules. I checked the public violation log that the HOA was required to maintain and found that only 7 had been fined. The pattern was clear. Patricia fined people she didn't like or who had previously crossed her. I submitted all this documentation with another appeal in February. This time, I requested an in-person hearing at the next board meeting. They couldn't deny that request according to their own bylaws. The February board meeting was tense from the moment I walked in. Patricia glared at me as I took a seat in the front row. When my turn came, I stood and presented my evidence methodically. I showed the photos, the spreadsheet, the violation log comparisons. "What we have here is clear selective enforcement," I concluded. "The rules are being applied arbitrarily based on personal bias rather than actual covenant violations. I'm requesting that my fine be rescinded and that the board implement consistent enforcement procedures." Patricia's face had gone from red to nearly purple. "Mr. Thompson, your fine stands. The board has discretion in enforcement priorities. We cannot possibly monitor every single violation in a community of 400 homes. We address violations as they are reported or observed." Your violation was observed. End of discussion. Then I wanted on record that this board is admitting to selective enforcement based on personal bias. Gerald Foster leaned forward. "We admit no such thing. The fine stands. If you refuse to pay, we will place a lien on your property." That was when I knew I was dealing with something beyond a petty HOA dispute. They were willing to threaten my home over $200 and snow on a truck. I paid the fine the next day, but I also made another decision. I was going to make Patricia Morrison's life as difficult as she had made mine. I started attending every single HOA board meeting. I read the entire covenant document cover to cover, all 93 pages of it. I learned every rule, every procedure, every loophole, and I started filing violation reports. Every time I saw Patricia's silver Lexus with expired registration tags, I reported it. When her lawn exceeded the maximum grass height of 3 inches by half an inch, I reported it with photos and measurements. When she parked her car in the fire lane while running into the clubhouse office, I reported it. I reported violations from board members, their friends, their families. By March, I had filed 84 violation reports. The HOA was legally required to investigate each one. Patricia called an emergency board meeting to address what she called abuse of the violation reporting system. "We have a resident who is weaponizing our covenant enforcement procedures," Patricia announced at the meeting. Her hair looked less perfect than usual, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "The board is proposing a new rule. Residents may only file one violation report per month unless they can demonstrate immediate safety concerns." I stood up. "That violates the covenant bylaws, which state that any resident may report violations without limitation. You can't change that without a vote of the full membership." A woman on the board, Sandra Mills, frowned. "He's right, Patricia. We would need a membership vote to modify reporting procedures." "Then we'll hold a vote," Patricia snapped. "That requires 60 days' notice and a quorum of 51% of homeowners," I added helpfully. The look Patricia gave me could have melted steel. The emergency meeting ended without resolution. The violation reports I had filed still needed to be processed, which meant Patricia and several board members were now facing their own fines. In April, Patricia tried a different approach. I received a letter stating that I was being fined $300 for harassment of HOA board members and abuse of community procedures. I immediately contacted Marcus. "They can't do that," Marcus said after reading the letter. "There's no provision in your covenant for that kind of fine. You're exercising your rights as a homeowner. This is retaliation, and you might actually have a case for legal action." I drafted a response citing the specific covenant sections that outlined allowed fines and procedures. I pointed out that my violation reports were legitimate, and that fining me for using established procedures was retaliation. I sent copies to every board member and requested the fine be rescinded immediately. Instead of rescinding it, Patricia doubled down. In May, I received a notice that the HOA was pursuing a lien on my property for outstanding fines totaling $500. They had added another $200 for continued harassment. That was when I hired Marcus officially. We filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Heights HOA for harassment, retaliation, and breach of covenant procedures. We requested an injunction preventing them from placing a lien on my property and asked for damages covering my legal fees and emotional distress. The lawsuit made local news. A Denver TV station did a story about HOA overreach featuring my case. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jennifer Cruz, interviewed me in front of my house. "So the HOA fined you for snow on your truck?" she asked. "That's how it started," I said. "Then they retaliated when I tried to hold them to the same standards they were enforcing against me." The story aired on the evening news. My phone exploded with calls and texts from neighbors. Some were supportive. Others accused me of causing trouble and hurting property values by bringing negative attention to the community. Patricia sent a community-wide email the next day claiming I was spreading false and defamatory information, and that the HOA had acted appropriately within its authority. The email urged residents to ignore troublemakers seeking attention. Then winter came back around. In December, nearly a year after the original incident, Denver got slammed with a massive snowstorm. 18 inches fell overnight, and the temperature dropped to 5 degrees. My truck was buried. I woke up at 6 in the morning, still angry about everything that had happened over the past year. The lawsuit was ongoing, scheduled for trial in January. I had spent thousands on legal fees. Patricia had made my life miserable, and the board had backed her every step of the way. I went outside in the freezing cold and cleared off my windshields and mirrors. I brushed off my headlights and taillights, And then I looked at the massive pile of snow in my truck bed and on the roof of the cab. I thought about clearing it off. But then I remembered that orange envelope, Patricia's smug face, the retaliation fines, the threats. I got in my truck and started the engine. I let it warm up for 10 minutes while I drank coffee and stared at my street, where everyone else was still asleep. Then I backed out of my driveway and drove directly to the clubhouse. The clubhouse sat at the front of the neighborhood, right next to the main entrance. It had a large parking lot and a circular driveway leading to the main doors. At 6:30 in the morning, the place was deserted. I pulled my snow-covered truck right up to the front entrance, perpendicular to the doors, blocking them completely. I put it in park, turned off the engine, and walked home. It was a mile walk through the snow, but I didn't care. My truck was legally parked in a parking area. It wasn't blocking any fire lanes. It was just sitting there, covered in snow, right in front of the clubhouse doors where Patricia would see it the moment she arrived for her morning office hours at 9. I got home, took a hot shower, and made breakfast. Around 9:15, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. "Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Morrison. You need to move your vehicle immediately." "Good morning, Patricia. My truck is legally parked in the clubhouse parking area. Is there a problem? It's blocking the entrance and covered in snow. This is unacceptable." "Well, the covenant says vehicles must be maintained in clean, presentable condition, but it doesn't say where they can be parked as long as they're in designated parking areas. The clubhouse lot is a designated parking area. Aaron, I'm warning you, move your truck or I'll have it towed." "On what grounds? I'm a resident. I have full access to community facilities, including parking lots. If you have my truck towed illegally, that's conversion and I'll add it to our lawsuit." The line went dead. I waited, curious about her next move. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized as the non-emergency police line. I answered. "Mr. Thompson, this is Officer Ramirez with Denver PD. We received a call about a vehicle blocking access to a building at your address. Is that your truck at 4521 Oakmont Boulevard?" "Yes, officer. It's parked in a legal parking space at my community clubhouse. The caller says you're blocking the entrance. I'm parked in the parking lot. The entrance doors are accessible. My truck is just near them." There was a pause. "Okay, I'm going to swing by and take a look. Can you meet me there?" "Of course." I drove my personal car, a Honda Accord, to the clubhouse. Officer Ramirez was already there, standing next to my snow-covered truck. Patricia stood nearby, arms crossed, practically vibrating with anger. "Mr. Thompson." Officer Ramirez was a middle-aged Hispanic man with a professional demeanor. "That's me." "So this is your truck?" "Yes, sir." He walked around it, looking at the position. My truck was indeed very close to the entrance, but there was a clear 3-foot walking path to the doors. "Madam," he said to Patricia, "the vehicle is in a parking space and doesn't appear to be blocking access. It's an eyesore. It's covered in snow and deliberately placed to harass me." Officer Ramirez looked at me. "Is that true?" "I parked in a legal spot. The snow is from last night's storm. I haven't had time to clean it off yet. He lives a mile away. He drove it here specifically to block our clubhouse." Patricia's voice had gone shrill. "Madam, he's allowed to park in community lots. Unless there's an HOA rule against parking here, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one." Officer Ramirez looked tired, like he had dealt with this kind of thing before. "There are rules about vehicle maintenance. He's violating our covenants. Then you'll need to handle that through your HOA procedures. I can't do anything here." He turned to me. "Sir, you might want to clean the snow off. It's going to turn to ice." "I'll get to it when I have time, officer. Thank you." Officer Ramirez left. Patricia stepped closer to me, her face twisted in fury. You think you're clever. You think this little stunt means anything. I think I'm parking my truck in a legal parking space. If you have an issue with snow on it, feel free to send me another fine. My lawyer will add it to the pile. You're destroying this community. Property values are going to tank because of your vendetta. My vendetta. Patricia, you fined me for snow on my truck. All I've done since then is hold you to the same standards you enforce against everyone else. If that's destroying the community, maybe the problem isn't me. I walked back to my car and drove home. My truck stayed at the clubhouse. Over the next 3 days, my truck sat there like a monument to petty HOA tyranny. The snow gradually melted off in the sun, but I didn't touch it. Other residents started taking photos. Some posted them on the neighborhood Facebook group with comments ranging from supportive, "Good for Aaron," to critical, "This makes us all look bad." Patricia tried to have it towed twice more. Both times, the towing company refused after confirming it was legally parked. She sent me 3 more violation notices, each with escalating fines. I forwarded them all to Marcus. On the 4th day, a different TV station showed up. Jennifer Cruz must have tipped them off about the ongoing saga. This reporter, Tom Brighton, interviewed residents who were split about 50-50 on whether I was a hero fighting HOA overreach or a troublemaker making everyone's lives harder. The story went viral locally. By the end of the week, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA was a laughingstock on Denver's social media. Memes circulated showing snow-covered trucks with captions like "Weapon of Mass Destruction" and "HOA's Worst Nightmare." Patricia called an emergency membership meeting. The notice went out to all 400 homes. Mandatory meeting to address community disruption and proposed covenant amendments. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the clubhouse main hall. I knew they would try to push through some kind of rule change to punish me or limit my parking rights. I spent the week before the meeting talking to neighbors, explaining my side of the story and encouraging people to attend. Saturday came, and the clubhouse hall was packed. I had never seen so many residents in one place. Patricia stood at the front with the other board members, looking grim. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here to address a situation that has spiraled out of control. A single resident has been abusing our covenant enforcement system, filing frivolous violation reports, and now parking vehicles in disruptive locations to harass the board. We are proposing several amendments to prevent this behavior." She outlined 3 proposals: limiting violation reports to 1 per month per resident, restricting parking at the clubhouse to official business only, and allowing the board to fine residents for conduct detrimental to community harmony at their discretion. When she finished, I raised my hand. "I'd like to speak." Patricia's jaw tightened. "The floor is open for comments." I stood and turned to face the crowd. "Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Thompson. Most of you know me from the news stories. I want to explain how we got here. Last January, I got fined $150 for having snow in my truck bed after a snowstorm. I cleared all the safety-required areas, but Patricia decided that wasn't good enough. When I tried to appeal, I was shut down. When I pointed out other vehicles with snow that weren't fined, I was told enforcement is discretionary. I paused, looking at the faces around me. Some were nodding. So I started paying attention to how rules were enforced. I found that Patricia and the board were selectively fining people while ignoring violations by their friends and allies. I filed legitimate violation reports to prove that point, and instead of addressing the selective enforcement, the board retaliated by fining me for harassment. They tried to put a lien on my house. I had to hire a lawyer and file a lawsuit just to protect my home over a dispute that started with snow on a truck. "That's not true," Patricia interrupted. "You were fined for legitimate violations." "Which violations?" "The harassment fines." "There's no covenant provision for those. You made them up to retaliate against me for standing up to your power trip." I pulled out my documentation folder. I have photos, violation reports, and enforcement records showing a pattern of selective enforcement. I have emails from board members admitting they prioritize certain violations, which is code for ignoring their friends' violations while hammering everyone else. A man in the back stood up. "I was fined $200 for having my trash cans visible for 1 day last year." 1 day. Meanwhile, the Fosters had theirs out for a week, and nothing happened. He gestured at Gerald Foster, who looked uncomfortable. A woman near the front raised her hand. "I got fined for my lawn being too long when I was recovering from surgery. I couldn't physically mow it." "But I see board members with grass over the height limit all the time." More residents started speaking up, sharing their own stories of seemingly arbitrary fines and selective enforcement. The room grew louder. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We're getting off track." "The amendments are designed to create more efficient procedures." "They're designed to protect you from accountability," I said. "If these amendments pass, the board will have unchecked power to fine anyone for anything they claim is detrimental to community harmony." "That's a blank check for tyranny." Sandra Mills, the board member who had occasionally shown some reasonableness, spoke up. "Perhaps we should table these amendments and instead form a committee to review our enforcement procedures. It's clear there are concerns about consistency." "I second that," said another board member, a younger man named Keith Roberts. Patricia looked betrayed. "We need to address the disruption now." "The disruption is caused by inconsistent enforcement and retaliation," Sandra said firmly. "Aaron has a point. We need to fix the root problem, not band-aid it with more rules." The vote was called. The amendments failed 3-2. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. A motion to form an enforcement review committee passed 4-1, with only Patricia voting against it. After the meeting, dozens of residents came up to talk to me. Some thanked me for standing up to the board. Others were more cautious, saying they supported reform but wished I had been less confrontational. A few were openly hostile, blaming me for the negative publicity. I drove my truck home that night feeling both victorious and exhausted. The fight wasn't over, but at least the community was finally paying attention. The Enforcement Review Committee was formed the next week. I volunteered and was accepted along with 5 other residents and 1 board member, Sandra Mills. Our task was to review a year's worth of violation reports and fines, identify patterns, and recommend policy changes. What we found was damning. Over the past year, the HOA had issued 217 fines totaling nearly $48,000. Of those fines, 156 went to just 28 homeowners, while the other 372 homeowners received a combined total of 61 fines. The 28 heavily fined homeowners had 2 things in common. They had all either filed complaints against the board or had previous disputes with Patricia. We also found that board members and their immediate neighbors had received only 4 fines total, despite clear evidence of violations. One board member had an inoperable vehicle in his driveway for 3 months, which should have resulted in escalating fines totaling $1,200. He was never fined once. The committee presented our findings at the next membership meeting in February. The report was detailed, professional, and utterly devastating. We recommended that all retaliatory fines be rescinded, that a new enforcement system be implemented with clear standards and appeals processes, and that the board undergo ethics training. We also recommended that Patricia Morrison step down as HOA president. The room erupted. Half the residents applauded. The other half shouted objections. Patricia stood at the front, her face pale. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice shaking. "I have dedicated 5 years to this community. I've worked countless unpaid hours to maintain property values and community standards, and this is the thanks I get. A coordinated attack led by someone with a grudge. It's not a witch hunt when the evidence is clear," Sandra Mills said quietly. "Patricia, you've let personal feelings influence enforcement decisions. That's violated the trust of the community." A vote was called on the committee's recommendations. The rescission of retaliatory fines passed by a wide margin. The new enforcement procedures passed unanimously. The recommendation for Patricia's resignation failed, but only by a narrow margin. Patricia remained president, but her power was effectively neutered. The new procedures required all fines to be reviewed by a 3-person committee before being issued, and appeals went to an independent arbitrator rather than the board itself. My lawsuit continued through the winter. Marcus was confident we would win on the retaliation claims. The HOA's insurance company reached out in March to discuss settlement. They offered to rescind all fines against me, pay my legal fees, and issue a formal apology. "We should take it," Marcus advised. "You've already won the bigger battle. The community has reformed its procedures. If you push for more, it gets expensive for everyone, including your neighbors." I agreed. The settlement was finalized in April, almost exactly 2 years after the original snow incident. All my fines were erased. The HOA paid Marcus $18,500 in legal fees. And Patricia was required to sign a letter acknowledging that the fines against me had been issued improperly. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In June, I got a call from Jennifer Cruz, the reporter who had first covered my story. "Aaron, you need to see this. The district attorney's office is investigating your HOA." "For what?" "Financial fraud. Apparently, someone filed a complaint about missing funds." My stomach dropped. "How much?" "Over $100,000. The story broke 2 days later. The DA's investigation revealed that Patricia Morrison had been systematically stealing from the HOA budget for 3 years. She had created fake vendor invoices for landscaping and maintenance work that was never performed, then paid those invoices to a shell company she controlled. She had also been pocketing cash payments from residents who paid certain fees in person at the Clubhouse office. The total amount stolen was $127,000. I sat in my living room watching the news coverage, stunned. Patricia had been so focused on enforcing petty rules and maintaining her power that I never suspected she was literally robbing the community. The HOA board called another emergency meeting. This time, Patricia wasn't there. Gerald Foster, looking haggard, explained that Patricia had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. He apologized to the community for not catching the theft sooner. "We trusted her completely," he said, his voice breaking. "She handled most of the financial details personally. We should have been more diligent with oversight." A resident asked if the HOA would recover the stolen money. Gerald explained that the HOA's insurance would cover most of it, but there would likely be a special assessment to cover the deductible and any uninsured losses. In August, Patricia was arrested. The news showed her doing a perp walk in handcuffs, her blonde hair disheveled, her face puffy from crying. She was charged with theft, embezzlement, and forgery. The bail was set at $50,000. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching it. Part of me was vindicated. Patricia's obsessive need for control and her willingness to abuse her power had been symptoms of deeper corruption. But another part of me felt sad for her. She had destroyed her life over greed and power, and now she would face serious consequences. The trial began in November. I was called as a witness, not about the theft itself, but about the pattern of behavior that demonstrated Patricia's abuse of authority. Marcus helped me prepare testimony about the selective enforcement, the retaliation, and the general culture of unchecked power. On the stand, the prosecutor asked me, "Mr. Thompson, in your interactions with Miss Morrison, did she seem concerned about proper procedures and accountability?" "No," I said. "She seemed concerned only with maintaining absolute control. She didn't want oversight or questions. When anyone challenged her authority, she retaliated. And that retaliation included financial penalties. Yes, improper fines that were later rescinded as part of our settlement." The defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled resident with a personal vendetta, but the evidence against Patricia was overwhelming. Bank records, fake invoices, testimony from other board members who had started noticing irregularities once they looked closer. The shell company traced back to her. The signatures on fraudulent checks matched hers. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Patricia was sentenced in January, 3 years to the day after she had sent me that first orange envelope about snow on my truck. The judge gave her 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of $127,000, plus penalties and interest. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked small and defeated, nothing like the imperious HOA president who had once wielded her gavel like a scepter. When given a chance to speak, she apologized to the community through tears, saying she had made terrible mistakes and let power corrupt her. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Morrison, you were entrusted with the financial well-being of your community. You betrayed that trust systematically and deliberately. You didn't just steal money, you stole peace of mind and security from 400 families. Your actions warrant significant incarceration." Leaving the courthouse, I ran into Sandra Mills. "How do you feel?" she asked, honestly. "Exhausted. I just wanted her to stop fining people unfairly. I never imagined it would lead to this. You did the community a huge service. If you hadn't stood up to her, we might never have looked deeper into how she was running things. Who knows how much more she would have stolen." She was probably right, but it didn't feel good. I had started this fight over principle, not to uncover fraud. The fraud was just a consequence of the same mentality that had led to the snow fine. Patricia believed she was above the rules and could do whatever she wanted. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA spent the next 6 months rebuilding. A new president was elected, a retired accountant named Margaret Williams, who immediately implemented transparent financial reporting and quarterly audits. The enforcement committee I had served on became a permanent part of the HOA structure. Fines dropped dramatically because enforcement was actually consistent and reasonable. My life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything. I still lived in my house on Maple Drive. Max still greeted me every evening when I came home from work. My truck, the infamous black F-150, still sat in my driveway, and I still didn't always immediately clear snow out of the bed when it snowed. No one ever fined me for it again. One afternoon in March, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A young couple got out looking nervous. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked. "That's me." "Hi, we're looking at houses in the neighborhood. Our realtor told us we should talk to you about the HOA situation." I smiled. "Come on in, I'll tell you the whole story." Over coffee at my kitchen table, I explained everything that had happened, The original snow fine, the retaliation, the lawsuit, the reforms, and Patricia's criminal conviction. The couple listened with wide eyes. "So, is the HOA okay now?" The woman asked. "Honestly, yeah, it is. The reforms have made a real difference. The new board is transparent and reasonable. They enforce rules consistently, and there's an actual appeals process that works. It's what an HOA should be." "Would you recommend buying here?" I thought about it. I would. The community is actually pretty great. Good neighbors, nice amenities, well-maintained common areas. We just had to go through a rough period to get the governance right. Sometimes you have to fight for reasonable treatment, but it's worth it when you win. They thanked me and left. I watched them walk back to their car, discussing what I had told them. I hoped they would buy in the neighborhood. We needed more residents who understood the importance of holding leadership accountable. That evening, I took Max for a walk around the neighborhood. The spring weather was beautiful, with flowers blooming in yards and kids playing in the streets. At the clubhouse, I noticed the parking lot where I had staged my truck protest. Someone had planted new flower beds near the entrance. They looked nice. I thought about everything that had started with that ridiculous fine. In a way, Patricia had done me a favor. She had awakened something in me I didn't know was there. A refusal to accept arbitrary authority and a willingness to fight for what was right, even when it was exhausting and expensive. I had learned that HOAs could be tools for community improvement or weapons of petty tyranny, depending on who was in charge and how much oversight they faced. I had learned that standing up to bullies sometimes required becoming a bit of a pain in the ass yourself. And I had learned that sometimes the fight was worth it, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Back home, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave Henderson. "Hey man, HOA approved my shed proposal. First time I've gotten something approved without a fight. Thanks for everything you did." I smiled and texted back. That's what neighbors are for. The next morning was Saturday. I woke up to find 3 inches of fresh snow on the ground, an unexpected late-season storm. I went outside and looked at my truck, covered in a fresh white blanket. I grabbed my brush and cleared the windshields, mirrors, and lights. The bed was full of snow, piled high and fluffy. For a moment, just a moment, I considered leaving it and parking at the clubhouse again just for old time's sake. But then I laughed and brushed it all off. The fight was over. We had won. There was no point in stirring up ghosts. I drove to Home Depot to pick up supplies for a deck project I was planning. As I pulled out of my driveway, I passed the house that Patricia had lived in before her arrest. New owners had moved in last month, a friendly family with 2 young kids. They had already repainted the exterior a cheerful yellow and put up a tire swing in the front yard. The neighborhood was healing. At Home Depot, I loaded lumber into my truck bed, the same bed that had once held controversial snow. I thought about how absurd it all seemed now, how a simple weather event had triggered a chain reaction leading to lawsuit, reform, and criminal prosecution. But that was the thing about standing up for principle. You never knew where it would lead. Sometimes it led nowhere. Sometimes it led to small victories. And sometimes, rarely, it led to real change that made life better for everyone. I drove home with my lumber, radio playing classic rock, feeling content. My house in Meadowbrook Heights felt like home again, not a battleground. The HOA was functioning properly. The community was stronger for having gone through the fire. That afternoon, I started building my deck. Dave came over to help, bringing his tools and a cooler of beer. We worked until sunset, measuring and cutting and securing boards. Other neighbors stopped by to chat, offer advice, or just see how the project was going. It felt like a real community, people connected and looking out for each other. "You ever regret buying here?" Dave asked as we cleaned up tools. "Sometimes, during the worst of it," I admitted. "But not anymore. This is a good place, it just needed some correction." "You provided that correction with extreme prejudice," Dave laughed. "Someone had to." We finished our beers and watched the stars come out. Max ran around the yard, chasing shadows and being generally ridiculous. Life was good. The final chapter of the Patricia Morrison saga came a few months later when the HOA received a check for $127,000 from the restitution order. Between that and the insurance recovery, the community had been made whole financially. The special assessment was canceled, and the excess funds were put into a reserve account for future emergency repairs. At the annual HOA meeting in June, Margaret Williams presented the financial report with complete transparency. Every dollar was accounted for, every expense justified and documented. The contrast with Patricia's regime couldn't have been more stark. During the open forum portion, an older woman named Helen raised her hand. "I just want to say thank you to Aaron Thompson. If he hadn't stood up to Patricia's abuse, we would never have discovered the theft. He saved this community." The room burst into applause. I felt my face redden. I hadn't done it for recognition. I had done it because someone needed to. "I appreciate that," I said when the applause died down. But the real credit goes to everyone who supported reform. Sandra Mills, Keith Roberts, the enforcement committee members, all the residents who showed up to meetings and demanded accountability. That's what made the difference. One person can start a fight, but it takes a community to win it. More applause. After the meeting, people lined up to shake my hand and share their own stories of HOA frustrations from before the reforms. Many expressed relief that things had changed. A few admitted they had initially thought I was just a troublemaker but had changed their minds as the truth came out. It felt good to be vindicated, but more importantly, it felt good to see the community healthy and functioning properly. Years passed. I stayed in my house in Meadowbrook Heights. The deck I built that spring became a favorite spot for barbecues and lazy Sunday mornings. Max got older, grayer around the muzzle but still enthusiastic about life. The neighborhood continued to thrive under competent, ethical leadership. I never forgot the lessons I learned during that fight. I stayed involved in HOA governance, attending meetings regularly and serving on committees. I made sure new residents understood their rights and responsibilities. And whenever someone received a fine they thought was unfair, they knew they could come talk to me about how to appeal it properly. The orange envelopes still went out occasionally when there were genuine violations, but they were rare and always justified. The culture had changed from enforcement-focused to community-focused, from punishment to cooperation. One winter morning, 5 years after the original incident, I woke up to another massive snowstorm. My truck was buried again. I went outside with my brush and cleared it off completely, including the bed. Not because I was afraid of a fine, but because it was the right thing to do and I had time. As I finished, a car drove past with snow piled on its roof. I watched it go, smiling slightly. The driver would probably get a friendly reminder notice suggesting they clean off their vehicle for safety, not a punitive fine designed to assert dominance. That was how it should work. I got in my clean truck and drove to work, taking the route that passed the clubhouse. The building looked welcoming now, with updated landscaping and a fresh coat of paint. It was a community asset again, not a fortress of petty tyranny. At a stoplight, I glanced at the spot where I had parked my snow-covered truck in defiance all those years ago. It seemed so long ago, like something that had happened to a different person. But it hadn't been a different person. It had been me, pushed to a breaking point and deciding to push back. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had just paid that first fine and moved on. Life would have been easier in the short term. I wouldn't have spent thousands on legal fees or countless hours on committee work. But Patricia would have continued her petty tyranny and her theft. Other residents would have suffered. The community would have remained broken. So no, I didn't regret fighting back. Not for a second, the light turned green. I drove forward into my day, into my life, into a future that was better because someone had decided that enough was enough. That snow on a truck wasn't worth a fine, and that people in power needed to be held accountable. It had started with snow on a truck. It had ended with justice, reform, and a community that understood the difference between rules and tyranny. Sometimes the biggest battles start with the smallest provocations, and sometimes, if you're willing to fight, you can actually win. I pulled into my job site, parked my clean truck, and grabbed my hard hat. Another day, another project, another chance to build something better than what was there before. That was the lesson, really. You could always build something better. You just had to be willing to do the work, stand up to the people who wanted to tear you down, and believe that change was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Williams. "Aaron, can you join the finance committee? We need someone who actually reads the reports." I smiled and texted back, "Sure, happy to help," because that was the other lesson. Once you fought for something and won, you had a responsibility to protect it, to make sure it stayed won, to help others understand why it mattered. The fight didn't end with victory. Victory was just the beginning of building something worth keeping. I looked at my snow-free truck one more time, remembering that cold morning when I had driven it to the clubhouse in defiance. It had been a small act of rebellion, but it had meant something. It had said, "I will not accept arbitrary authority. I will not be bullied. I will not go quietly into the night while someone abuses their power." That moment had changed everything. Not just for me, but for 400 families who deserved better than they were getting. And now they had it, because one person decided to park a snow-covered truck in front of a clubhouse and refuse to back down. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one moment, one refusal to accept unacceptable treatment. The ripples spread outward, touching lives you never knew, creating changes you never imagined. As I walked toward the construction site office, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Because the hard parts had taught me who I was and what I was capable of. They had shown me that ordinary people could stand up to petty tyrants and win. They had proven that justice, while slow and expensive and exhausting, was possible. And they had all started with snow on a truck, and a woman named Patricia Morrison who thought she could find her way to respect. She had been wrong, dead wrong, and now she was sitting in a prison cell while the community she had tried to dominate thrived without her. That was justice. Not perfect, not simple, but real and earned and worth every minute of the fight. I got to work, building things, solving problems, living my life. The HOA story faded into neighborhood legend, the kind of thing people told new residents to explain why the community was so different from typical HOAs. I became that guy who fought the HOA and won, a title I wore with quiet pride. Years continued to pass. Max eventually crossed the Rainbow Bridge at the respectable age of 14. I adopted another golden retriever, a puppy named Charlie who brought new energy into my life. The deck needed repairs and updates. My truck was eventually replaced with a newer model, but still a Ford F-150, still black. The neighborhood grew and changed. Families moved in and out. Kids grew up and went to college. The clubhouse got renovated again with better facilities. Property values rose steadily, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because Meadowbrook Heights became known as a well-managed community with fair governance and great neighbors. And through it all, I remained vigilant. Not paranoid, not looking for fights, but aware that the lessons learned during the Patricia Morrison era could be forgotten if people weren't careful. Power could corrupt anyone. Oversight was essential. Accountability mattered. I made sure those lessons were passed on to new board members, new committee volunteers, new residents who might not understand how precious good governance really was. I told the story of the snow fine, the retaliation, the reforms, the criminal conviction. I made sure people understood that what they had now wasn't automatic or guaranteed. It had been fought for and won, and it needed to be protected. On the 10-year anniversary of that first orange envelope, the HOA held a special community event. Margaret Williams, still serving as president because she was excellent at the job, gave a speech about the transformation of Meadowbrook Heights from a place of fear and arbitrary enforcement to a genuine community. "We owe a debt to Aaron Thompson," she said, gesturing to where I stood in the crowd. "He stood up when it was hard, fought when it was expensive, and never backed down when it would have been easier to give in. Because of him, we have fair governance, transparent finances, and a community we can all be proud of." People applauded. I nodded in acknowledgement but felt uncomfortable with the praise. I had just done what anyone should do when faced with injustice. I had fought back. That shouldn't be remarkable. It should be ordinary. But maybe that was the real lesson. Maybe standing up to petty tyrants should be ordinary but wasn't because people were afraid, or tired, or figured it was easier to just pay the fine and move on. Maybe my contribution wasn't heroism, but simply refusing to be afraid, refusing to give up, refusing to let Patricia Morrison turn my community into her personal fiefdom. If that inspired other people to stand up when they faced similar situations, then maybe the whole ordeal had been worth something beyond just fixing my neighborhood. Maybe it had been a small example of how democracy and justice were supposed to work. Ordinary people holding power accountable, refusing to accept abuse, fighting for what was right even when the odds seemed long. As the community event continued with food and games and socializing, I found myself standing near the clubhouse, looking at that spot where my snow-covered truck had sat all those years ago. It seemed almost mythical now, that act of defiance that had started everything. But it had been real. I had been angry and fed up and determined to make a point, so I had parked my truck and walked away. Such a simple thing. Such enormous consequences. A young woman approached me, introducing herself as Jessica, a new resident who had moved in last month. "I heard you're the one who reformed the HOA. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How did you know it would work? When you started fighting back, how did you know you wouldn't just make everything worse?" I thought about that. I didn't know. I just knew that doing nothing definitely wouldn't work. Patricia wasn't going to suddenly become reasonable. The board wasn't going to check her power on their own. If I wanted things to change, I had to make them change, even if that meant risking everything getting worse first. That's brave. It's necessary. Someone always has to go first. Someone has to be willing to take the heat, absorb the attacks, stand firm when everyone is telling you to back down. That's not bravery. That's just what has to happen for positive change to occur. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. I hope I would do the same thing if I were in that situation. You might be someday. Not necessarily with an HOA, but somewhere in your life, you'll face a moment where you have to decide whether to accept something wrong or fight against it. When that moment comes, remember that fighting is an option. It's always an option. She thanked me and moved on to get food. I stayed by the clubhouse a little longer, thinking about all the moments and decisions that had led from that first orange envelope to this community celebration. It was a strange journey, full of anger and frustration, but ultimately leading somewhere good. Charlie bounded up to me, having escaped from wherever I had left him, and demanded attention. I scratched his ears and felt grateful for the simple things: a good dog, a nice home, a community that functioned properly. These were things worth protecting. These were things worth fighting for. The sun set over Meadowbrook Heights, casting golden light across the neat lawns and matching mailboxes. Kids played in the street under the watchful eyes of their parents. Neighbors chatted and laughed at the community event. Everything looked peaceful and orderly, exactly what Patricia Morrison had claimed to want when she was fining people for minor violations. But the difference now was that the peace and order came from cooperation, not fear. People followed the rules because the rules made sense and were enforced fairly, not because they were afraid of arbitrary punishment from a tyrant with a gavel. That was the kind of community worth living in. That was what I had fought for. As I walked home with Charlie, I passed my black F-150 sitting in my driveway. It was clean and well-maintained as always. No snow this evening, just the cooling summer air and the promise of another beautiful Colorado day tomorrow. I had learned so much from that truck, from the snow that had once covered it, from the fine that had started everything. I had learned about justice and perseverance and community. I had learned that ordinary people had extraordinary power when they decided to use it. I had learned that you couldn't always win, but you could always fight, and sometimes fighting itself was enough to change things. Most importantly, I had learned that home wasn't just a house in a neighborhood. Home was a place where you were treated fairly, where rules made sense, where people looked out for each other instead of looking for violations to report. Home was what you made it, what you fought for, what you protected. Meadowbrook Heights was my home. Not because it was perfect, but because I had helped make it better. That was enough. That was everything. I went inside, fed Charlie, and made dinner. Through my window, I could see the lights coming on in neighboring houses as families settled in for the evening. It was ordinary and comfortable and safe. No orange envelopes waited in my mailbox. No fines threatened my financial security. No petty tyrants wielded unchecked power over my daily life. Just a regular evening in a regular neighborhood, made extraordinary by the fact that it was fair and functional and free from abuse. That was the victory. Not the courtroom drama or the criminal conviction or the news stories, but this, a quiet evening at home without fear. I raised a glass to the memory of that snow-covered truck and the chain of events it had triggered. Then I settled in to enjoy my evening, my home, my life, my community. All of it hard-won, all of it worth it, all of it proof that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could lead to the biggest changes. And if another Patricia Morrison ever tried to take control, I would be ready. We all would be ready. Because we had learned the lessons, fought the battles, and understood what was at stake. We would never go back to arbitrary enforcement and petty tyranny. We had tasted real community governance, and there was no going back. That was the real ending to the story. Not a dramatic courtroom scene or a triumphant celebration, but simply the ongoing commitment to fairness, accountability, and treating people with respect. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. I finished my dinner, played with Charlie, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But whatever came, I would face it knowing that I had stood up when it mattered, fought when it was necessary, and helped build something better than what existed before. That was enough. That was everything. And it all started with snow on a truck and a refusal to accept injustice. The end.